Welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast
with our mom,
Misty Bailey. Tips and encouragement
for
real-life homeschooling
is headed your way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty Bailey, blogger at Joy in the Journey and podcaster here at Joyfully Homeschooling. And today's interview is with Sarah Mae. Sarah Mae is the author of the book, The Complicated Heart, Loving Even When It Hurts, a story for all the brokenhearted daughters who need to know if their little girl hearts could ever heal. She is the host of the Complicated Heart podcast and speaks all over the country, encouraging women to walk in freedom. She wrangles 3 extroverted kids, a naughty yellow lab, and a new husky puppy, because obviously she loves chaos. Holding down the fort with her in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, is her woodworker husband, Jesse. And I met Sarah many years ago at the Illume conference when I was a brand new blogger who was totally fangirling over Sarah. I had read her book Desperate, and I had read her book about Mary and Martha and homemaking, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to this conference, but it's not like she's going to talk to me. And she did, and she is so relatable and so kind, and she truly cares for people. If there's anything I could say, in the 2 times I've met Sarah, I act like we're BFFs, but maybe we are in my own mind, but and the 2 times I've met Sarah and the many times I've talked to her online, I have to say she is so relatable and truly, truly cares about each and every person that she comes in contact with. She has a heart to serve and is just as beautiful on the inside as she is on the outside. And I was super excited about this interview because it is with the first guest, I believe, who is no longer homeschooling. And I feel she brings a unique perspective to this podcast and feel that she has a story to tell that many of us can learn from. And I know when I first talked about interviewing her on the podcast, I had many people message me and be like, she's not homeschooling anymore. Why are you interviewing her? And I think that, guys, there's a problem there. There's a big problem there. We can learn from people who aren't homeschooling. And I think that just because she's not homeschooling does not mean that she doesn't have something to bring to the homeschooling community. In this episode, she talks about how when she decided not to homeschool, the community that she was in truly rallied around her when she decided to put her kids in public school. And that's a reminder to me to give grace. Listen, we don't know the battles others are fighting, and instead of passing judgment, we should be examples of the love of Christ. I know many times in the homeschooling community when people we look up to stop homeschooling, sometimes we second guess ourselves or judge them for giving in, and neither of these are appropriate responses, and neither show the love of Christ. We need to follow his call on our life, and we need to be the hands and feet of Jesus to all people, regardless of their educational choices. So I also want to say that in this episode, we talk about anxiety and depression, and this is not a medical advice show. We are not doctors, so this is a disclaimer. If you suffer from anxiety or depression, please do as Sarah suggests and see a Christian counselor. That is so, so, so important. So without further ado, here we go with my episode with Sarah Mae. Podcast sponsors make the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast possible. So let's take a moment and thank our current sponsor, Masterpiece Society. Don't just expose your kids to art, let them experience it. Charlotte Mason wrote, "The art training of children should proceed on 2 lines. The child should begin both to express himself creatively and learn to appreciate art. Masterpiece Society is here to help you with both art expression and art appreciation. By utilizing our rich multimedia art lessons and our Open and Go art appreciation curriculum, you will create meaningful art experiences with your kids and teens. We have completed a few lessons from the Masterpiece Society over the last few weeks and have really enjoyed what we have completed so far. They make bringing art, beauty, and creativity into our home a painless process, which is perfect for this busy homeschool mom who cringes at the thought of arts and crafts. Don't believe me? Try it out yourself for free. Go to findingjoyinthejourney.net homeschooling.com/masterpiece society to get your free lesson delivered straight to your inbox. That is findingjoyinthejourney.net/masterpiece society to get your free lesson delivered straight to your inbox. Now, let's get on with the podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty Bailey, and today I am here with Sarah Mae. How are you today, Sarah?
Hi, I'm doing great.
So I'm super excited to talk to you. We met a few years ago at the Illume conference, and I miss Illume. I really do.
I know. It was a great conference, but I'm really glad that I don't do that anymore.
I understand. It was one of the very first blogging things I'd ever been to. So it was nice. I always loved how welcoming it was. And then the book Desperate fell into my lap and changed my life. I love that book. And I want to thank you and Sally so much for writing it. It is a wonderful piece of encouragement for any homeschool mom out there who's not read it yet. Make sure you grab it. So
thank you.
You're welcome. So Sarah, can you introduce yourself real quick to everybody?
Sure. So my name is Sarah Mae, and I'm a writer and a podcast host and a speaker, but mostly I am a stay-at-home mom to a 5th grader and 2 middle schoolers. So that's sort of my main shtick. I am home during the day with my dog, so I guess I'm a stay-at-home dog mom too, but I work during the day from home. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I just wrote a brand new book that came out in September called The Complicated Heart, Loving Even When It Hurts. And my podcast is the same name, The Complicated Heart Podcast with Sarah Mae.
Yeah, and I've been listening to your podcast, and it's definitely one that everybody should check out. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So this episode is part of a series on overcoming obstacles to homeschooling. So, and then I mentioned to my listeners that I was going to be interviewing you, and I heard some people respond back. They're like, well, she's not even homeschooling. Why do you want to talk to her? Yeah. And I know that because in 2017, you dropped a bomb on homeschool moms everywhere. Yeah. When you shared a post following the spirit to public school, which I'm going to leave in the show notes, but I feel that you have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to battling anxiety, depression, and homeschooling. And I also know, and some people may disagree with me on that, but homeschooling is not a fix-all answer. And we as moms have got to learn to take care of ourselves so that we can care for our children. And I think that's a topic that you know a lot about. So can you share with us a little bit about your story?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for being so gracious to even have me on. I really appreciate that. Second of all, I was like a homeschool lifer, you guys, like truly, truly. I remember when I would have friends who would stop homeschooling, and I would say to my other homeschool friends, like, they're dropping off like flies. Like, what's going on? Like, stay strong. I love homeschooling. Like, I have a lot of friends who homeschool. I am so pro homeschool. So I feel like unless the Lord really directs you to change that, I mean, homeschooling is such a wonderful way to go, and really my top way to go, if that's where the Lord has you. So as far as my story goes, so I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And so when my husband and I got married and I got pregnant and we had our first, I quit my job and was doing that, was being home with my kids. And then it just sort of transitioned naturally for me into homeschooling. I had started to hear about homeschooling, and I really loved the idea of continuing to be with my children and to educate them. And I got into a little bit of legalism. I was listening to some voices that were like, if you don't homeschool, you're sending your kids to the state, and that's really wicked and bad. And so I sort of also chose homeschooling, not only I wanted to do it, but there was this sort of feeling of condemnation if I didn't. So a little bit was mixed in. Once I finally got rid of the condemnation part and I stopped listening to those voices, then I began to actually joyfully homeschool, because I was doing it for the reasons that I wanted to spend more time with my kids than them being away from me. I wanted to make sure I was imparting scripture, that I was choosing what they were going to be learning and not learning. And just that I loved being with my kids during the day. I loved starting our day in our PJs and making pancakes and starting with reading the Bible. And, I loved picking curriculum with my kids and doing things with them and not being bound by a school schedule. So I started it in that way. And then my husband really got on board and loved it. And so we both were very like, we love this. We always want to homeschool. But we also always said we will always do it with our hands open each year, because you just don't know what's going to happen in life or how the Lord is going to guide you. But that's how I got started. And then once I was doing it, I just loved it. I wasn't super awesome at it. I kind of joked around that I was the type B homeschool mom. I used to have a type B homeschool planner because I'm not type A. Like, I had to not read blogs from my type A homeschool friends because they were so structured and like had their hair done by 8 a.m. and they were so good at crafts. And I was terrible at all of those things. So once I put on blinders, so to speak, and I just enjoyed my children and did what we felt led to do, it was just such a joy and so much better. So that's how I started.
Yeah. And so then in the midst of all of that, here you are homeschooling. I promoted your homeschool mom type B planner to my type B homeschool mom friends. Yep. I'm over here type A, but I'm like, hey, you're type B. I have this friend who has this planner, and here it is. But then you dropped that bomb.
Yeah,
Sarah.
It was a bomb on our family too. It was a bomb on my husband.
And I remember that. And I remember in the blogging and homeschooling community, people talking about it. And like you said, I think everybody pictured you as this lifer. So
what I thought.
Yeah. So what happened? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let me just say this. First of all, it was absolutely agonizing. It felt like somebody ripping my guts out because that's how much I wanted to homeschool and thought I was supposed to homeschool. So when you tell me people were talking about it in the homeschool community, like, I didn't hear any of that. So I'm like, oh my gosh.
It wasn't bad. It's just, I think anytime somebody, a homeschool, like, I know you wasn't a homeschool blogger, but I think anytime somebody in the online community homeschools and stops, people,
yes.
And I think people follow people sometimes too. And so then when you're following these people who homeschool and, you think you've got all of your little ducks in a row, so-and-so homeschools, I'm doing it too. And then people, I think people second guess, well, if they're not doing it, should I still do it?
And it can be a disappointment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotions and feelings. And I do get that. And so, the bomb was dropped. So it's so bizarre to even explain it because it sounds literally crazy. So, to the point where I told my husband that, like, if I ever died, he would have to find a way to homeschool the kids. Like, he's like, I got to work. I'm like, I know, but like, you're going to have to take my insurance policy or something and like homeschool the kids, you know, that's how much of like it meant to me. And so anyway, this really does correspond with depression. And I have struggled with depression on and off since college, probably since high school, but really since college, I would say. And it just kept getting worse. And the year before I put my kids in school, it got really, really bad to the point where I would be standing at my kitchen sink doing the dishes and I would just drop to the floor and be bawling and like have no reason why. And the only thing I could cling to was the Lord in these dark times. And I remember playing worship music and my kids were around and I would just be crying. And I'm like, you guys, I'm just really sad, but I know that God is with me in this. Because I couldn't hide it. I'd have to stay in my room and hide all day if I were going to hide my depression from my kids. It was that bad. And I didn't want them to see me like that. So I tried my best to not show it totally, but there were times where I couldn't help it. And so And so that had gotten pretty bad, and that made homeschooling for me even harder because I felt like I was drowning, and instead of somehow getting a life raft, I was having to swim harder. And of course I couldn't, catch my breath. I couldn't get any air. I just felt, like I was drowning. But I just continued to do it. And then a year after that, or I guess in the summer, right before school started the next year, we had already started homeschooling. I had bought all of my curriculum, and then I found myself, this is going to sound so bizarre, I found myself driving to the district school office and picking up enrollment papers and coming home and filling them out. And I literally remember driving to the school and feeling like, what am I doing? But like, it felt like I was compelled, but it wasn't like an evil compelling. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel like a spiritual attack. It was nothing like that. It was, I don't know how else to say it, except I felt like the Spirit was like forcefully moving me because I wasn't willing to even consider anything else. So, and I'll come back to why that matters, or why that was the way it was. But anyway, so I'm filling out these papers. My husband comes home and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know." I was like, "I'm just filling out these enrollment papers." And he's like, "Why?" And I was like, "I don't know." I was like, "I just feel like I'm supposed to fill them out." And listen, I'm a woman who is in the Word of God. Like this, I'm not just frou-frou, like what is, whatever. This was just weird. I don't know. So filling out the papers. And then all of a sudden, I'm actually thinking like, what if we put our kids in school? And I'm like, where is that thought coming from? Because at first I thought, is that a thought from the enemy? Like, why am I even thinking about this? Like, this isn't something I think about. And I never even considered it. And it just kept getting stronger. And I was praying and praying, and my husband was praying. And I just kept feeling like, I think maybe we're supposed to put our kids in school. But like I was fighting it so intensely that it was stirring up so many emotions in me. And I was feeling like really sad and really confused and really guilty. I had so much guilt for even considering putting my kids in school. Like it's clear that somewhere in there, I was putting my trust, identity, something into homeschooling. Because when you take something that's an idol away from yourself, it feels like snatching your guts out of you. And so somewhere I think I had so put homeschooling before anything, like it had become sort of, I think, an idol. I think so.
Yeah.
And because I had a lot of judgments against other people who put their kids in school too. So anyway, so it's like ripping my guts out. I feel so guilty for even considering it. And I will tell you, the people who were the most kind and affirming and supportive were my homeschool friends. Like I had two of the dearest homeschool friends who walked alongside me, just so encouraging me. And one of them, because the other thing I kept feeling like was, I'm so selfish. Like, why would I want my kids in school so I can be home and work? Like, that's so selfish. These were the accusations in my mind. And I remember having a homeschool friend say to me, like, is it selfish, Sarah? Like, is it really selfish? Like, wherever your children go, she would read me Psalm 139, and she would change some of the words to give perspective. Like, where can I go from your presence? Can I go to the public school and not be in your presence? Well, no, like God is with my children wherever they go. And she was so encouraging. And then she would say, Sarah, it's okay to put anything on the table for discussion. Anything can be on the table for discussion. You don't have to feel guilty for just putting it on the table and saying, like, let's talk about this. So that was really helpful. Another thing was my other friend had talked to me about, like, our righteousness is not in our schooling options. Our righteousness is in Christ and Christ alone. And that was really, really helpful. And then I think the last thing that really was helpful for me was a friend of mine saying, nothing's permanent. Like, just because you decide to put your kids in school this year, that doesn't mean this is like a permanent decision for the rest of your kids' school years. Like, you can change that if you decide, like, let's say you put them in school and then you decide you want to homeschool again, like, that's fine. So I had so much encouragement, so much prayer from my homeschool friends. I mean, I had zero condemnation from any of my homeschool friends. I couldn't believe, like, how kind and supportive they were. And then sort of the last thing was, my husband and I went to our in-laws, well, his parents. They're very, very wise, kind, gracious, godly Christians. And they had homeschooled for a while, and then they had put their kids in school. They had done homeschooling private and public. And we just were like, we are torn up about this. And my father-in-law, who is an elder at our church and just a wonderful man, looks at us and says, why not? Like, if the Lord is leading you in this way, then why not try it? Like, why not? Like, maybe you are supposed to do this. And if you're not, because, of all the fear you have, and all these other things, that's not really from God. And so we felt like, you know what, this is a discussion on the table. It has nothing to do with our righteousness. The Lord is with me and my children. And it's not permanent. It doesn't have to be permanent. And so with all of those things, and really feeling like the Lord was leading us to do it very clearly, I mean, it felt so clear, we made the decision. And then I cried for 2 weeks and watched TV and ate a lot of crab dip. It's really bad.
Was it a hard decision, do you think, to share it, like, in the online community? Like, I know you said locally, your family, your friends, they supported you. I'm assuming that they probably also knew you had been battling a little bit of depression.
Yes,
at that time too. So how did the online community respond to you? I know you said you hadn't heard any of it. And was it a hard decision for you to share publicly?
It was a harder decision for me to share with Sally Clarkson than to share publicly, because she's so dear to me and she's so wise and gracious and kind. But I was so scared to tell her, because she had mentored me for so long.
Yeah.
And she was, homeschooled her kids all the way through. And so I had way more fear telling her, just because I have so much respect for her. And she was so gracious and so kind. And plus, I remember talking to my husband the night before I called and told Sally. And I remember saying, like, I'm so afraid to tell her, like, and he said, Sarah, why are you putting so much fear into this? Like, first of all, he's like, Sally loves you. She's not going to condemn you. But second of all, if she did, your identity is not in what she thinks of you. It's in Christ. And of course, my fears were unfounded, because Sally is so kind and gracious and believes in following the Lord more, above anything else, And so that getting through that was probably the hardest. And truth be told, I don't remember any online feedback, good or bad. Probably because maybe the Lord protected me, because I was very fragile at that time, like very, very fragile. So I don't really remember the feedback, and I have just felt very loved and very supported and very, very grateful for that, because it was a very tender, trepidatious thing to do. And then, going back to the depression that I experienced, and the watching a lot of TV and eating a lot of bad food and crying all day, every day, which legitimately I did, bawling on my floor face down, 2 things came up. One, I realized that my kids being home had been sort of a cover for some underlying things that God really wanted to heal in me. And I couldn't do it when they were home, because I had to do my best to, you have to still homeschool your kids. Like, you
have to pour it to your kids.
Yeah,
and so then you end up not taking care of yourself, which is what had happened. And I'd say your community in real life saw that, saw those things you
they
were
did.
suffering with, and that's why they supported you
Yes.
wholeheartedly in what you were doing.
Yeah, and so that's when I finally went to a doctor, and they realized that I had severe anxiety and depression, which if you would have told me I had anxiety, I would have been like, no, I don't. Hello, I'm the
Mhm.
type B mom. Like, I'm so laid back. It was crippling. And I had been in counseling and I had done different things. So it wasn't like I was just trying to stick a Band-Aid on. But when my doctor suggested a low dose of anti-anxiety medication to help me through, um, I was really scared. That's a whole other story, but it was really helpful to finally get some help. And the second thing was I didn't give myself any grace to transition.
Mhm.
So I was just beating myself up, and I was so sad. And, while my kids were gone, and I hadn't given myself space to grieve at all. And again, my friends surrounded me and they were like, Sarah, you've been with your kids for 11 years, like all
Mhm.
day, every day. Like, give yourself a little bit of grace to transition. Like, this is like, you're going to grieve. It is a loss. And I'm like, yeah, that's really true. It's a loss. And so for anybody in any transition to anything, we have to give ourselves room to feel whatever it is that we're feeling. And if it's great sadness, then feel that great sadness and let it have its process.
Well, I think it sounds to me like your friends were the perfect example of Christ, giving
Yes,
you this grace and giving you this love that you couldn't give yourself, and helping you and surrounding you, and how what a blessing it is that you had that community there
yes.
rallying around you. That is
I am
awesome.
so grateful. And even my husband, I remember one night, he got so kind of tired of me saying, like, am I selfish? Because, like, if the kids go to school, like, I am going to work during the day. Like, I'm not just going to sit here. And I just, I kept believing this lie that, like, I must be so selfish. That was the accusation I feel like the enemy was whispering to me. And my husband finally said, Sarah, if we're going to put our kids in school, don't be a martyr about it. Like, if the
Mm-hmm.
Lord is leading us to do it, then just enjoy the days. Like, do the work you love. Don't be a martyr. Don't sit around, being sad forever about it. Like, do some stuff you like.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah. So, Sarah, I know that in the midst, like your decision to put the kids in school had a lot to do with the Lord laying it on your heart. And then also the fact that you needed to heal
Yes.
and you were battling this anxiety and this depression. But how, I know through the years, I'm sure you just had some bad homeschool days.
Mm.
That the yellow bus looks tempting. We've all had them. We've all threatened to go and get the enrollment papers, but not really do it.
I
How
mean, when
could,
the kid lies on the floor and they're like, you're so mean for
yeah.
making me do this math.
Oh yeah. But how can you tell the difference between a
Great question.
bad day and the Lord leading you this other direction?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I think that we just have to get used to there's going to be bad days, whether you homeschool, public school, no matter what you do. I mean, your kids are going to fight against work
Mhm.
and they're going to fight against, sometimes your authority, for better or worse. Like, kids are, gonna do that. It's normal. I remember Sally Clarkson always telling me, like, Sarah, this is par for the homeschooling course. Like,
Mhm.
this is gonna happen. And she said, you just continue to teach them truth. You just continue to correct them. And one day, hopefully, like, they'll get it. But it won't be for like maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years. I mean, her point was it's a day in and day out work, faithful, good work. And so bad days are just that. They're just bad days, and you're just going to have them. And it doesn't mean you throw in the towel. It just means some days you say, you know what, guys, let's just go get some ice cream. Or, you know what, let's get a pizza and watch a movie today. Now, obviously, you can't do that if you have lots of bad days. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to chalk it up to what it is and keep moving forward the best that you can in grace. And I don't think, and it's such a personal decision between each family, but I think we put our kids in, I think every schooling decision is supposed to be made as we're surrendered to Christ. Like, our hands are
Yes.
open, and
Mhm.
it's not about how I'm feeling necessarily or having a bad day. It's really about, Lord, I am on my face before you. What do you say? And will you guide me and my husband? and show us the next step. Like, I think everything is about surrender. And I feel like if you are feeling the nudges to perhaps do something different or choose a different school choice, like, be really before the Lord and seek really wise counsel. But at the end of the day, you've got to be surrendered to Christ.
And obedient to what he's calling
And
you to do.
obedient to what
Yeah.
he tells you to do, no matter what people are going to think. Because like I said, I had a lot of fear about what people were, I did have fear about what people were going to think. And I had fears about, I had so many fears. And that's kind of a big clue that you're looking to people instead of looking to be obedient to the Lord.
Exactly, which is why I think that, when you look to people, which goes back to what I had talked about before about the homeschool community, when you're looking to people that are homeschooling and like I said, they make the decision not to do it anymore and it bothers you and you do have those feelings like, am I doing this right? Am I, you start questioning yourself, you're looking to those people and you're following those people and their choices, not necessarily what God is calling you to do. I think that happens a lot more than we maybe want to admit.
Yeah. And we don't want to make any decisions based on fear or guilt
or legalism.
We should make all of our decisions free and clear before the Lord. And I will tell you what, the peace for me came after the obedience. Once we obeyed, we stopped struggling. Like, we did not feel that wrestle. I mean, I went through my depression, but it wasn't, the wrestling was gone. It was like we'd made the decision and then we had this peace about the decision.
And your kids have done great.
And they've done really well. Now, one of my children, it's been a real struggle. And we were 99% positive we were going to homeschool one of our kids this year. And we were just, Lord, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I was about to literally make the decision to homeschool. And my child found out who their teacher was. And all of a sudden they were like, I am so excited for school.
Aww.
And we had prayed for this certain teacher who's very tender and kind. Because it was for my real tenderhearted child. And I was like, what? And because they'd been begging me to be homeschooled.
Aww.
And then they were like, I'm so excited for school. And I was like, what the heck just happened? And then my father-in-law was like, well, Sarah, I guess you got an answer to your prayer. And I was like, I guess I did. And so
That's
this
awesome.
child is now thriving this year. And I'm like, what a roller coaster. But that's what it is. And it should be a roller coaster, because when you are dependent upon the Lord, you're not in control. And like, he can change things and we follow the Spirit. And so, I mean, I don't know if that's right to say it should be a roller coaster, but I guess I just mean nothing's ever going to just feel like a perfect put together puzzle. Like, I'm constantly before the Lord about decisions and what's going on with my kids. And it's hard.
Oh. Well, Sarah, I had a couple questions that I want to get to before I know you have to get your kids. What piece of advice would you give a mom who's battling anxiety right now while homeschooling?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. It's really important to communicate to somebody how you are feeling. When often we have anxiety, we can feel so much shame. And we feel it for two reasons. Shame tells us it's not a big deal. You're making a big deal out of this. This is dumb. Like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You're fine. But what shame feels like is there's something wrong with you. You are so weak. You are such a failure. Like, it's this double voice happening, and it's awful and confusing. And so the enemy doesn't want us to be vulnerable and share what's really going on, especially if you have a husband who, like mine, is very like, he's such a hard worker. He gets up every day. He's got energy. He goes to work. He's just like a very, like, he doesn't struggle with anxiety or depression. I mean, he's just, and so for me to be honest with him was extremely difficult, but I had never given him a chance. And he said that to me. He's like, you never even gave me a chance. And so what we do is we make these stories up in our mind about how we think somebody will respond. And so my biggest encouragement is, if you are feeling that, to tell somebody, a good friend, talk to your spouse, be honest about how you're feeling, because you can't get help or find real rest unless you let others in to support you, pray for you, encourage you, all of those things. So I guess the number one piece of advice is tell somebody. And then the second thing I would say is find ways to rest and fill your soul, because we pour so much of ourselves out because we love our kids and we want to do good by them. But make sure that you are taking time to rest, that you are taking time, even if it's a few minutes a day, to spend time with the Lord and get truth. I think homeschool moms especially, I mean, all moms get attacked with accusations with mom guilt, but homeschool moms especially, because there's so much comparison in the homeschool community,
Yep.
you know, and it just can wreck you. And I would say don't read blogs or books or look at things where you begin to feel really bad about yourself when you see that, because I think that contributes to a lot of anxiety. Here's the great news is you're going to fail. You're going to fail as a mom. You're going to fail as a homeschool mom. The Lord says it in his word. But you know what? When you fail, he is the one who is there for them, because we're all going to make mistakes. That's why we need Jesus. But God loves your kids even more, and they will learn to be dependent upon him. I have mentors who tell me that is where they found the Lord, is in my own failures. So I think there's a real relief in remembering that, like, you're not going to get it all right. Give it up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that sometimes our greatest joys come from our failures. In all honesty, they come from our failures because we realize that we can't do this on our own. And I think that's the time that Christ calls us to our knees, and we have to sit there with our hands out and ask him for help and guidance. And when we do it on our own, we just carry way too heavy of a burden, and we're not meant to walk alone. We're meant to walk in community with Christ and those others that love us around us. And I think that's so, so, so important.
May I add one more thing? I know you have a couple questions and we'll get to them, but I just want to say this too. I am not an advocate for taking medication for anxiety. That's not my shtick. But I do think if you are suffering from pretty severe anxiety that's leading to depression, and you're really struggling with homeschool because of that, I would encourage you to see a Christian doctor who may help you. And perhaps you might take something that will help you to get through your days. It's not, I have an excellent interview actually going up on my podcast today with my doctor who treats me, and she's a Christian and she's so faithful. And she just talks about, like, you're not covering anything up. You're not masking anything. You're literally helping your body regulate the serotonin in your brain if there's something jacked up there. And so I would just say prayerfully, if you are really in the depths, prayerfully consider talking to somebody. There is no shame in getting help.
Yeah, and that's very important for people to know too. Thank you for that. And we'll leave a link to that show in the show notes. So
Thank you.
I have one more question I want to get to, and then we'll let you tell everybody where they can find you and connect with you. And that is, what, if anything, would you go back and do differently in the season of life that you've lived out the past couple years?
You know, it's so funny that you ask me that, because I remember asking a mentor that and when I was homeschooling, and she said, oh, well, I just wouldn't sin. And her point being, you know, I don't know if I could go back and think about what I may change or not change, because I did the best that I could.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was as faithful as I could be. So with that said, I think probably read to my kids more. I did read. We did a lot of reading, but more of it. I just think you can't get enough of reading to and with your kids. So
that's fun. I have a couple podcast episodes with Sarita Holzman from from Sunlight, and I'm sure she would love that quote. Read to your kids more. Grab some Sunlight books.
Develop that, because what you're doing is, it's not about the reading. You're developing a strong bond and memory with your kids in association with reading good books. And Oh, gosh, there's so many things I could say, and I'm going to have to go in a minute. I mean, don't open the Pandora's box of like phones and too much TV. And oh my gosh, keep it closed for as long as you can. Keep it closed because once you open it, man, it's hard to put back.
What was the favorite book you read to your kids while you were homeschooling?
People ask me this all the time, and my favorites are so different from my kids' favorites. Like, I loved reading out loud White Fang. I loved reading The Tale of Despero. I love Kate DiCamillo so much. The Tale of The Tale of somebody. It's blanking out in my brain, but it's by Kate DiCamillo. Well, my kids, they're like, I mean, whatever, those are fine. They liked like Ruby's Potty, like my youngest, or like The Bear That Cried and the Girl That Cried with the Bear. So, like, just books that were like good books, but not the ones that I was like, no, this is really good literature. They're like, can we just read Ruby's Potty again, Mom? Like, seriously, like, it's so funny to me. So
I love it. I love it. So Sarah, can you tell everybody where they can find you and connect with you in the World Wide Web?
Thank you so much. You can find me at sarahmae.com, which is SAREHMAE.com, thecomplicated.heart.podcast.com, and Instagram at Sarah Mae Writes, RITES.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for taking the time to talk with us today. And you have a blessed and wonderful day, my friend.
Thank you. You too. All right. I'm going to go pick my kids up from the rainy walk.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been an episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please take the time to leave a rating or review on iTunes or whatever platform it is that you use to listen to this podcast. That tells the powers to be I'm not talking to myself. Also, hit subscribe. Then you will catch every episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast each week right there in your podcast feed. You can find show notes and more at joyfullyhomeschooling.com and clicking on the episode number of the episode you are looking for. Thanks, guys. I hope this podcast encouraged you to head out there and have a more joyful homeschool.